entirely up to you. You have an option of speaker or gallery, and then you can also put it on full screen. So just wanted to let you know that. And with that, I did forget one thing. Debra, I forgot to pull up your bio this morning. So, and please don't make me try to find it live with 33 people watching me.
No
I do know that you've got great nonprofit experience before you took over the role that you have at the League. So you want to give us a little of your background as well, too.
Sure, thank you. And thank you all so much for being interested in this topic, for being active in the League. It's so satisfying. As Christy said, I am currently the executive director for the League, but in my earlier years, I was the executive director for a homeless shelter in the Fox Valley, the emergency shelter of the Fox Valley, and had an opportunity to kind of grow that organization from pretty much just a shelter program to a program that was inclusive of case management services, of other services. We created a lot of partnerships in the community. So what we're doing now as a League, we were doing 20 years ago at that organization. I also did a couple of years, I was with the state of Wisconsin for 8 years in 2 different departments. I started with the Department of Workforce Development as a job center supervisor, and then I went on to the Department of Children and Families and was an administrator for the W-2 program in Wisconsin. So many of the positions that the League holds, whether that's around health and human services, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on good government, I've kind of had opportunity to live those positions and in my own personal work experiences. So, and now I am I never work, just so you know, I play every single day. This is a passion for me. This is what I love to do. We were talking with attorneys and our partners having to do with the Dropbox case last night at 12 p.m. It's like, or 12 a.m. I guess that is. It's nonstop, but it's wonderful, and I feel like we're making great progress. And with that, I think I'll stop the introduction and transfer over to what we really want to talk about, which is the League and the journey that we're on currently to transform this organization from what we have been the last 100 years to what we will be in the next 100 years. And this is an exciting journey for me. I'm going to try this morning to not only share with you the nuts and bolts of what the transformation journey is, but I also want to share kind of my own personal perspective of why this is so critical for us right now. The transformation journey started back in 2015, frankly. The board at that time, the US board at that time, was seeing some disturbing information about our organization, not the least of which was we were financially in trouble. Our membership was declining from around 80,000 members nationwide to just over 50,000 members. And that's a significant decline. And that board took it upon itself to try to figure out what do we do to change those negative trends. And a lot has ensued since then, not the least of which was the release in 2018 of the actual transformation roadmap. That's a 41-page document available on the League management site of the US's website. Worth the read if you're interested. It does contain a lot of the information that was the ground setting information for where we're going now, and really set the goals for what we wanted to do as an organization. I'm sure you're all thinking to yourselves, why? Why do we have to change? We're a 100-year-old organization. We've got a great reputation. We understand voting. We understand voters. We understand what to do to mobilize voters. So why? And the answer to that is somewhat because of those declining trends for the organization, but somewhat because we were noticing that there were a lot of new and emerging organizations coming into what I call the democracy space. They weren't joining us, they were creating alternate organizations. And that in and of itself was making us a little less relevant. So it was important, I think, that we stay relevant by figuring out why not join us? Why create a separate organization to do what the league had been doing, for almost 100 years? As I already mentioned, we were at that crossroads of declining membership and financial hardship as a nationwide organization. We were then, more so than we are today, not a very diverse and inclusive organization. With all due respect to all of us, I like to say that we're a bunch of, no offense now, but we're a bunch of old, wealthy white women. And that is not an attractive profile for a person of color, for a young person, for a person who is not as highly educated as many of the members in this organization have been over our near, at the 2015 and near 100-year history. So we had a unique demographic problem in the organization that was, I believe, causing us to be less attractive to people who wanted to be in the voting rights space, but didn't feel like we were the organization that they could easily belong to. So that was sort of, I think, the genesis of the transformation journey. I really think the 2015 board was also motivated by the fact that not only were these emerging organizations happening, but what we were seeing was a new and different and more robust conversation about civic engagement, and a space that the league should have been leading that conversation, and yet we were not. We were in the conversation, but we weren't leading the conversation. So it's those kind of internal and external factors that really caused that board in 2015 to ask itself, how do we prepare for the next generation of league members? And how do we begin to set the stage for what is our second 100 years? And everything that has happened since then is all rooted in that desire. The desire to become more relevant, the desire to maintain our leadership position, the desire to be the go-to organization. And so individuals interested in, whether you want to call it civic engagement, voting rights, the work that we do and own, that they would choose us to do that work and not try to create or become a member of a counter organization. Following the 2016 convention, where some of these concepts were talked about, but we really hadn't released, the board had not released the much of the data that had been collected, the information. I mean, if you'll recall, for those of you who are longer with the league, in our conventions, we always, of course, adopt a budget, but I think it was startling for many of us to see the financial hardship position that the league was in. I mean, we were at a serious point with regard to our ability to even maintain national presence. And they had cut back severely on the staff coming into convention. They had, it was awful. They had terminated 7 key staff at the national office as a result of the need to contain costs. And this was shocking to all of us who were there. I mean, these were the people, these were the go-to folks that boards around the state and around the nation and the state league level had relied on to do our work. And it caught us all by surprise. We just didn't see it coming. We didn't know. There was no transparency. And frankly, all of that has changed as a result of this transformation journey. The roadmap itself was actually released in 2018. And the roadmap's release came with a lot of what we weren't going to do. I mean, it did talk obviously about what we were going to do as an organization, and much of that is in the detail of the roadmap itself. But the league was really, and I think this was a stroke of brilliance of the boards in 15, 16, 17. They led with what we weren't going to change. And that was critically important, I think, for this organization to understand what our strengths were and why we were going to work to preserve what was strong and good and what, built that 100-year outstanding reputation in the voting rights space. We were going to continue to focus 100% on our mission work. And I think for those of you who have come to annual meetings of the State League in the last number of years, you've heard me talk about impact. And that's exactly what the National League was trying to get us to all focus on, is we are going to celebrate and create more impact in this space that we have owned for so long. And we will do that by concentrating on the mission that, Christy started this meeting with, which is so critically important: empowering voters, defending democracy. We also doubled down at that point in time on our commitment to remain a nonpartisan organization. This is what separates us from a lot of the organizations that are entering the voting rights space, many of them supporting candidates, many of them supporting parties. We have never been there. We never will be there. And that was kind of a non-negotiable for all of the boards thinking about changing this organization to be more relevant. What makes us as impactful and easy to respect is our commitment to our nonpartisanship. And then they made the commitment to all of us that we would continue to be a membership organization, that it is the strength of this organization, the power that we have in the spaces that we occupy is you. It's the grassroots, it's our members. And without the, whether it's 50,000 national members, whether it's 80,000 national members, 150,000 national members, that is where we derive all of our strength. What you were doing yesterday in Port Washington, what I participated in Madison, and in the other, 16 courthouse rallies that happened around the state yesterday, that's our power. That's where we have influence. That's why the press comes to cover it. That's why that's us. That's the league. And the boards in those transformational years, those early journey years, recognized that and held it out as a non-negotiable. We will stay a membership organization. The process then for, once we kind of identified what we weren't going to change, we really had to identify what we were going to change. And they kind of broke that work, if you will, into a couple different categories. And I'm going to kind of talk through at a high level, and I'm going to try to leave a lot of time for questions because this is big and maybe new to some of you, maybe old to some of you, but it's a lot of nuance to organizational change. And so I want to make sure that we all feel comfortable with it and understand its genesis and kind of its successes to date. the journey started really with a very clear strategic focus. We had to look at ourselves to understand what is the story of us and how are we going to properly tell that story to continue to be relevant, to continue to make the impact that we all know we can make. So that the beginnings of what have been the national program for many years now, Making Democracy Work, really came out of that organizational need to focus ourselves on making democracy work. And we've had conversations at conventions and councils ever since Making Democracy Work became the focus, the strategic focus of the organization. It's like, why aren't we doing other programs? Why aren't we studying other things as we always had in our 100 years? And the answer to that really is, when you think about what our reputation is, what people see us as, it's the organization that really has power and impact in the voting rights space, making democracy work, engaging voters, educating voters, getting voters out to vote, watching at our polling places, ensuring that our elections are administered properly. That's us. And we really, the journey that we're on is to emphasize and concentrate our effort around that purpose, that Making Democracy Work purpose. The mission, the vision, and the value statement that Christy read earlier actually was born in those formative years of this journey. We had a much more, the long mission statement that we had for years and years. I have to tell you, when they first announced the new mission and vision, it was like, what? Where'd all the text go? Even I was a little surprised, but it's so much easier now. When you think about talking about the league, you can tell anybody what our mission is. It's 4 words, and that is, I think, a tool that we were, given by, the creators of the new mission, vision, and value statement, that has done nothing but help us strengthen ourselves and rally around that purpose. The next, I guess, work that was done was to kind of make a structure happen internally that would carry us through and beyond the transformation itself. So we've seen a number of changes organizationally that are really helping us do the work of transforming to become more relevant and have more impact. State and local leagues throughout this journey have been really asked to adopt this, Making Democracy Work campaign, to focus in this space. And as a national organization, they really pivoted toward fund development and kind of growth opportunities, partnering opportunities to ensure that we had that increased capacity in the Making Democracy Work space. The National League asked all of us to adopt the new mission, the vision, and the value statement, which we have. We've seen in the recent years the new commitment, like our nonpartisan policy, a new policy about DEI, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. That was, the strategic focus was really important, but the discussions that the journey started us having on becoming a more inclusive organization culturally was critically important to what is this journey that we are all on. The original assessment back, this is 2015, 2016, 2017, was that, first of all, volunteerism was changing. Kind of the volunteers that this organization had always engaged and thrived on, women, not workforce oriented, not part of the workforce, had lots of time and intellect to belong to this organization, could use their energies to promote this organization and its mission and values. That, we realized culture, big culture, changed. Many women were in the workforce. They couldn't participate as volunteers 40 hours a week because they had a day job. And yet we had an organization that sort of assumed that that hadn't changed. And we created a lot of volunteer opportunities, like we had always created volunteer opportunities. And those volunteer opportunities really were not able to be occupied by the same number of individuals, which is why I think we saw the drop in our membership, which is why probably people were going to other organizations where they could do the kind of volunteerism that they wanted to do, which was go in and go out, do something, make an impact. And, but you didn't have to commit 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week to volunteerism and feel like you still did something really good. So that was a kind of a epiphany moment, I think, organizationally for us, which is that, we needed to create a more welcoming internal culture for anyone who wanted to be part of what was, boosting up our work, our reputation, making democracy work, being part of this really trusted organization. So from that was born essentially what we are now calling our diversity, equity, and inclusion tools, including the new policy, which all leagues now have adopted as a part of their own policies and bylaws. This component of the transformation journey probably, well, in my mind, is the most significant part of our transformation. This cultural shift is opening a door that we had artificially closed ourselves. And that door is open now for us to partner and ally with so many organizations that we didn't even see before until they started doing our work. And we, I don't know, can't say what the board conversations were back in 2015, if it was just that we were threatened, that we were afraid we were dying, that, I don't know what the conversations were, but it was, in my mind, a stroke of brilliance to have recognized that for this organization to thrive, we needed to be more inclusive, because the members of old were just that. I mean, we still demographically, our average age, I believe, is 72 years. If we don't recruit young people, if we don't recruit individuals that represent our whole community, we will go away, through, attrition that is, caused by our mortality. And I think we really, that is, it was very wise to recognize that that was an ongoing problem for the organization. The other thing the organization had as a problem wasn't just kind of this internal culture, but we weren't really looking at what were best practices of other nonprofits that were thriving. And so in 17-18, the league invested a good amount of financial resource in hiring very sophisticated consultants to help us learn what organizations that were thriving were doing. And, you know, some of it was that culture shift that we already just talked about, or I just talked about. But some of it was, you know, changing our volunteerism model. Some of it was the, you know, how we do our, you know, our work, the kind of becoming a more modern organization, you know. In 2015, I got to tell you, we didn't have a Twitter account. We didn't have an Instagram account. Many of us didn't even have websites. And so we really had to kind of get into a more modern nonprofit space in order to, you know, continue to thrive and continue to be able to have the impact that we wanted to have. The next part of the transformation roadmap really identified how we become a healthier league network. We have the federated structure. We have a national organization, a state organization, and then of course all of our local leagues. And then the local leagues are comprised with all of us who are members in the grassroots. But the tiered structure in and of itself, I think, isn't well understood by every member. It's, you know, there's a lot of nuance toward maintaining a federated structure. And the National League recognized that they had to make it easier for everybody to really engage. And so they made some commitments early on. First, they wanted it to be easier to join at any level. So, and we had struggles, and still to some extent have some struggles. It's like, if you push the, you know, become a member button on a website, a local website, you know you're joining that local website. If you don't have a local league in your area, but still want to be a member of the league, you can go to a state website and join as a member at large. There are many people who were donating to the National League, thinking they were becoming members, but there was never a membership option at the National League. That was just a donation. And then the National League didn't necessarily tell state and local leagues, hey, somebody's interested in league because they're giving us a donation. You should try to connect with them and engage them in local activity, which is where league happens. So the National League set out to really kind of work on how do we do join at any level in at all levels, that kind of clarity. We're still working on that. We made some updates in the roster system. We're introducing tools, the Club Express, the Outreach Circle. You know, National is helping to kind of shepherd these changes to league to make it more efficient, make it easier, and of course, as a result, more welcoming for folks who maybe don't have 20, 30, 40, 50-year histories with the organization. That time frame, that 2017, 2018 time frame, was also when the league, National League, really doubled down on branding and kind of standardizing affiliate agreements and helping to ensure that there was a consistency, so that whatever happened in Ozaukee is also what's happening in Maine and New York and, you know, California. And that wasn't true, I have to tell you. So we're working on that. Now, is it perfect right now? We're still working on it. No, we're not. We haven't reached perfection, but just committing to all using the same logo, the same branding, many of the same tools is really helping us develop that stronger league network, helping us feel more connected to others who are in league, because we are actually now in practice doing more of the same things with each other, even when we're not, proximate to each other. So that has been kind of National's commitment to those programmatic sort of changes. I've seen in these years more resources coming from National League, more pass-through grants. I have to tell you, we at the State League are getting grants from the National League to do, the people-powered fair maps work, making democracy work. That was unheard of pre-2015. I mean, the National League, all of its resources that it raised, used for its national purposes. And though we were all in this federated structure, we weren't helping one another as much as the vision has us helping each other. And it's a really good path, I believe, to be on. So in essence, that's what the, kind of increasing our capacity, increasing our networking ability, focusing strategically on our work. That has been, that's the roots. That's where the transformation journey started. I will say that we have made just in the last probably 3 years, twice as much change impact as we did from 2015 to 2020. The commitment to DEI, the education, all the webinars, all the tools that National Office is giving us really is both in word and in practice, creating that cultural change in this organization that I think is going to be the new base for us in the, in the ability for us to have the impact that we want to have long-term in the democracy space. I think we've seen wonderful changes coming at the national level that really are meaningful to the work being done at local and state league levels. Not only the tools and the resources, but I think the attitude of our national league to, kind of instead of thinking top down, they're really embracing bottom up. They want to hear from us. They engage us. They talk to us more. They survey us. It's just, if you think back, for those of you who have been in the organization, probably more than 10 or 15 years, this is all new. And it's wonderful. And it's really creating a space, I think, that we can all be in that is a much better, much more together space. I also think the National League's commitment to reducing administrative burden on both the state level leagues and the local level leagues is really coming into fruition now. We've seen, just released is the new roster management system. Talk to Ellen Penwell about that if you want to learn more. The Club Express, the organizing tools, the communication, the branding information, again, so much real usable assistance being provided that has reduced at our level of work and your level of work, some of what, we don't have to invent every wheel anymore. When a wheel gets invented, whether it's in a state or whether it's at the national level, it's now shared. So others that come next will benefit from that tool and won't have to make that tool happen. And that is transformational in so many ways and so fabulous for the organization. I think that the progress that we've made in the last, just a couple of years in our democracy work is a direct result of this transformation. we went from being a financially vulnerable organization to having a surplus last year in national budget of over $10 million. People, organizations, grantors, foundations, whomever is, putting out resources to be in this space, this democracy space, they're now contributing to leagues at the national level, obviously at the state level and at the local level, because they see what we're doing differently and they like it. And they know that because we are this organization with 100 years of history and reputation in this space, unlike some of those startup organizations that kind of got us going on this journey, they've come and gone. But who's still here? We're still here. Why are we still here? Because we have so many committed volunteers to the mission and purpose of what is the League. I have not mentioned yet, although I mentioned some of the other tools, but the Vote 411 tool is, it existed in a different format back in 2015. But when National doubled down on really creating a tool that could be used across the nation, that I think was a catalyst for change that has really helped propel our ability to educate voters. Because National can do some of the fundraising, they can help build the tool. We can use the tool locally and at the state level and all across the nation. But the same advertising that goes out in New York, for folks to, click into vote411.org is the same advertising we can use here in Wisconsin or in California or Texas or Florida. That kind of think ahead, think strategically work that was done is not only is it the transformation, but it is keeping us relevant and allowing us to increase our impact in this space. Making Democracy Work, the program we've all been focused on for so long now, has in this past year seen a few tweaks. It's still the program, by the way, but we're learning how to talk about it and brand it a little bit differently and a little bit more relevantly. And in last year's annual meeting, Virginia K. Solomon, our CEO at the national level, came and talked to us about Women Power Democracy. And Women Power Democracy is a new name for the old game of making democracy work. It's really put it into those 4 quadrants that she explained to us, which is helping us focus our efforts in the same areas that we were focusing our efforts under the Making Democracy Work umbrella. But really, it's I think an easier way for us to explain our work to others, to donors, to businesses in our community who might want to participate. And then I think the whole campaign that was started almost 3 years ago now, the People Powered Fair Maps campaign, has really helped jettison the organization because representative government is what we have been standing for 100 years. When the Russo verdict came down, the board at that time was furious, and they just couldn't believe how that could possibly have happened. And because of all that had happened from 2015 through 2018 in the way of readying us to be a more relevant, more high impact organization, they were ready immediately to stand up what has now become the People Powered Fair Maps initiative, get states around the nation involved, and they brought us to a convening They, used the council and convention in those intervening years to really help teach everybody why we were the organization positioned to lead fair maps around the nation, and to really stand up and not be nice little old ladies, but to stand up and say, this is wrong and we want it changed. And I think it jazzed up a whole bunch of people, including me, and continues to. And it's probably on the strength of that one element of what is Making Democracy Work and the Women Power Democracy initiatives that is really continuing to help us recruit new members, be visible in our communities, and opens the door for us to talk to stakeholders, whether they are elected officials or whomever, press, courts. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey in that regard. The strategic focus, and I'm going to wrap up here quick so we can get to some questions, has really morphed from those few basic elements that I talked about to, in the last couple of years, two elements that have a couple of sub-elements. And I'll go through them quickly. This is all up on the website. You can take a look at this, but we're still focused on increasing our capacity so that we can advance the strategic goals. And then the second area of high focus is that we continue to be a healthy and inclusive league network. Under the capacity, big, strategic objective is all our work around civic engagement, systems change, and partnering. And then under the healthy league, inclusive league, is all the work we're doing to not only in word, but in practice, implement DEI policy, develop leadership in this arena, build our power by being that more inclusive league community. Our operations fit under this other, kind of healthy league goal. That is the stuff that we're doing, the tools that are being built, the sharing of information, all that kind of fits under the operational element of supporting that goal. And then our commitment to the culture shift. And that is how we will grow our activism and ability to advocate. So we took what was really strong as an organization, kept all of that, and we're building it. Just in some cases tweaking the edges, in some cases like with the culture shift to become more inclusive. We've had to make some significant changes, all for the purpose of increasing our impact and continuing to be the leaders in this democracy space, the civic engagement space, whatever you call it. But that is what's happening organizationally to ensure that the League of Women Voters for the next 100 years continues to be seen as the prominent advocates in this space. So with that, I will turn it back to Christy so we can do some questions and answers.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. That was so helpful. For newer members, for longer term members to have that background. I want to start off by just asking a quick question. You mentioned that last night you were working till midnight regarding the
I don't work, I play. This is not work for me.
Tell us about the Dropbox, because it's in the news this morning. Where are things going with that?
Yesterday afternoon at 2:00, there was a hearing that was actually set on Wednesday. In the hearing, we had actually, after Judge Boehner indicated initially that he disallowed the use of drop boxes in Wisconsin and disallowed assistance in delivering ballots. So those were his two original rulings that had come earlier in the week. Well, we immediately asked for a stay. And when I say we, it was our partners at Interfaith and Block and us were in this Dropbox case. What happened, unfortunately, is he did not. We were hoping on Wednesday he would have ruled on the stay. He chose not to, and he set a hearing date for Friday, yesterday at 2:00 in the afternoon. So we were hopeful then we would get our stay yesterday at 2:00 in the afternoon. Well, that didn't happen either. He went ahead and indicated he was not going to stay the order. So the order is in force. He moved the date of the enforcement of the order from the 27th of January, the end of next week, to Monday of next week, which means it's actually in force before absentee ballots will go out on Tuesday, the 25th. So yesterday afternoon, after hearing this horrible news, our attorneys at Law Forward immediately appealed those decisions to the appellate court and are asking the appellate court now to issue the stay so that we can not change the rules, within basically 3 weeks of an election. We know from our experiences in 2020 that when you change the rules so close to an election, it just causes a lot of voter confusion. People don't know what to do. It's hard for those of us who are the educators to stand up proper education when the rules are changing. I mean, all of the marketing information that we've used for the last year and a half before elections, we have to strip out all of the stuff now about drop boxes because we can't use them potentially. And I've been reluctant, although we've been working on it, so it's ready to go next week. But we want drop boxes. We want people to, if you have a disabled person in your circle, and you have been the person who's been, picking up their ballot, because it's hard for them to get it out to the mailbox or get it to the clerk's office, or they don't drive, or whatever. You can't do that now, and that's news. That's big news, and we're going to have to stand up big information campaign about that big news. Now, I'm still hopeful the appellate court will give us a stay, and so everything that we've done in the last number of elections we'll be able to do in this election. But my crystal ball is too fuzzy to know what's going to happen by next Monday. But that's the situation right now. We did put out a press release yesterday. So did Barbara Beckert at the Disability Votes Coalition, and Bonnie Margalis at the Wisconsin Interfaith. So we're all on the same page. We're all saying this is just horrible, and we need the stay, and we need the appeal of the original, not just the Dropbox, but the assistance part of the ruling. So.
Thank you. Questions from, I'm just checking the, anyone, you can raise your hand or just go ahead and ask your question. Unmute yourself if you have a question.
I'm reading here the Russo case. That was the case, the North Carolina case, where essentially the federal court said that they were not going to decide what was too much of a gerrymander. it had a ripple effect. It was the case in front of them was a case specific to North Carolina's very gerrymandered maps. But if you'll recall, from 2011, after the maps in Wisconsin were enacted after the census of 2010, and because there was the trifecta in Wisconsin with all three branches of state government being Republican, those Republican gerrymandered maps were enacted and signed into law by Scott Walker. At that time, attorneys, Law Forward didn't exist at that time, but some of the same attorneys who are now involved with Law Forward were the attorneys that were involved in what became known as the Whitford v. Gill case. And that was the case that asked the courts essentially to look at Wisconsin's maps, realize that they were disenfranchising voters by making some voters overly relevant and some voters underly so. And that case was proceeding along it started in Wisconsin courts, it went to the federal courts, it was at the Supreme Court in 2017. And the Supreme Court indicated that they didn't rule on the case. On the Wisconsin case, they ruled that we did not have standing because the plaintiffs in the case, in addition to the organizations like the League, only represented 12 of our 72 counties. And the Supreme Court felt that to have standing, we should have plaintiffs from more of the state represented. So that's what we were doing while Russo, the North Carolina case, was coming also to the Supreme Court. We were gathering more plaintiffs to join our case so that we would have standing, so the Supreme Court could rule, as the federal courts, lower federal courts already had, that our maps were gerrymandered, partisan gerrymander, and that they were unconstitutional as a result. So that's what we were hoping the Supreme Court of the United States would do with the Whitford case, was affirm the lower federal court's decision that our maps were unconstitutional. Well, then came along the North Carolina case, and lots of conversation later, basically the Supreme Court said, kind of basically, not our job. We're not going to determine what's too partisan. We've got other indicators. If it's a racial gerrymander, we'll decide on that. If it's a improper apportionment, we can decide on that. But this idea of a gerrymander, that's a local problem, is sort of what they said in the Russo decision. So, but without the highest court in the nation saying that the federal courts could decide what is too gerrymandered on partisan grounds, I mean, we never went back with the Whitford case then, despite the fact that we had collected more plaintiffs and whatnot. They already basically said, we're not going to decide. And so don't bring us any more partisan gerrymandering cases. So that's where we were. And then came the campaign, which is really the People Powered Fair Maps campaign. We were ahead of the curve in the United States because of the Whitford case. We were already, and Debbie Patel can attest to this, but we were already educating everybody in Wisconsin about how awful our gerrymander was with regard to representative government. When some voices count more and some voices don't get heard at all, that's not what the founders had in mind. And we need to work with every ounce of stuff that we have to make sure that we don't have partisan gerrymandered maps in any state, and especially here in Wisconsin, where we kind of the prize winner right now for the worst gerrymandered maps in the nation. So.
Along with that, Deb, you were part of a panel presentation, I think within the last month or two, around fair courts.
Yeah.
That recording is out on the LWVWI website, correct?
Yeah, correct.
And
And
that's,
that's a pivot that we're making. Starting 2 years ago, we have been taking kind of significant money from an organization called the Piper Fund and their counter group, the Proteus Foundation, and with partners from other states who are dealing also with court issues. We're trying to do what we did with raising the educational bar about what is gerrymandering. 10 years ago, I don't think anybody in the state of Wisconsin, bar a few very scholarly folks, knew the word. Now I think everybody in Wisconsin knows what gerrymandering is. And that's the power of the education that we were able to put into this market. The problem with our courts right now are many, but you probably all noticed when the media talks about the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the US Supreme Court, they no longer talk about a fair and impartial court. They're talking about the 6-3 court. They're talking about the 4-3 court. And what they're talking about is that we know before a case is ever heard, before a shred of evidence is looked at by those justices, what the ruling is going to be. That is not fair and impartial, and that is not how the third branch of government was intended to serve us. So we're really trying to do kind of like what we did in the fair map space, now in the fair court space, which is to demand that this third branch of government do its job and not be so suspect to or influenced by money, by parties, by major contributors, that making democracy work, you will call one of the major tenets of making democracy work is this whole notion about the money in politics and how it undermines government, good government. So we've been in this space a long time. We're branding it right now a little bit differently, but this is about money. This is about power. This is about not doing your job so you can retain that power.
There's a question from Connie Kincaid. Can you expand the relationship of people-powered maps with the People's Maps Commission?
People-powered maps is the big educational initiative to basically ensure through statutes and through actions by elected officials that we have rules against partisan gerrymandering. So in Wisconsin, we've been focused on trying to pass the bills that are have been introduced now for, I believe, 7 sessions, still have never even gotten a public hearing, but we want to change Wisconsin law to make sure that partisan gerrymandering is disallowed. So that's been our implementation of people-powered fair maps. Other states are trying to do this through, statewide referendum. Wisconsin doesn't have binding referendum. Some states are trying to change their state's constitution. Some states are working with the national organization to, and we are too, at some level, to change the rules and the statutes at the federal law level to ensure. And so that's the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, now since just last week into yet another bill. But all of that action and activity is to create law that basically outlaws partisan gerrymandering. The People's Maps Commission was actually created by the governor. It is supported by our work in the fair maps space because a commission as was first used in like the Iowa model, if you've heard about that, it's basically these independent commissions, aren't beholden to a party, aren't elected, they come in and come out every 10 years after the census to create maps that apportion according to what the census tells them to apportion. They have no skin in the game, so they keep the cities together, they keep the counties together. You get maps that, like in Iowa, kind of everything looks like a nice square box. All the districts are about the same. The box is a little bit bigger or smaller depending on the population in the area. But, there's none of this reach into a community and grab out 3 blocks worth of people because those are all voting Republican and we need them in this area so we can turn it Republican, or vice versa. Like split Beloit into 3 districts so that none of the areas of Beloit that are majority minority have any voting power at all. So that's the kind of stuff that the People's Maps Commission, an independent commission, was intended to do. And they did. There were some issues. One, the governor appointed them, so they were never seen as being completely independent. I think if we would put into statute an independent commission to join maps, we'd have to figure out a way to appoint those commissioners that wouldn't be perceived as being partisan. We know, those of us who are near and dear to this, that commission had nothing to do with the governor's partisan, role as our governor. That commission took applications from over 200 individuals in Wisconsin who wanted to be involved in this process. 3 judges, retired judges, went through all of those applications and winnowed it down to 1 commissioner per congressional district. And then the governor served on the commission as well. So it really wasn't a partisan process, but try to tell some people in Wisconsin that that's the case. That's kind of where we intersect.
Deb, I have a quick question for you. Just like with the People's Maps Commission, can you tell us some of the other alliances and partnerships that you formed here in the state of Wisconsin, and maybe even on a national basis, some of those partnerships that have been formed as a result of this transformation?
In Wisconsin, I think we have deepened our partnerships with the other players, if you will, in the democracy space. With the onset of the pandemic, I think all of us scrambled to figure out what we were going to do for that April 2020 election. And it forced a new and deepened relationship. At that time, about 12 partner organizations, all in Wisconsin. All voting is local. The Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, Voz de la Frontera, Bloc, Souls to the Polls. We were all very motivated to make sure that, kind of the folks that were in each of our memberships would understand what to do to not only stand up a safe election, accessible election in a pandemic, but that we would, help, to the greatest extent that we could as different organizations. So we put out a ton, if you will recall, we bought advertising, the State League and some of these other organizations as well. We had never invested a single nickel in paid advertising, but it was the only way to get messaging into communities across the state quickly and accurately. So, it's just a lot of different pivots happen. So we have new partners now, I think, in the media space. We have new partners. We have new partners that are also trying to do the work of making sure people get out to vote, that they're safe when they're out to vote. We created a whole series of informational advertisements around absentee ballots and how to request them. You'll recall before the pandemic, only about 7% of Wisconsinites used an absentee ballot because they were going to be gone that day of the election, or they were indefinitely confined, or there was a very small segment of folks. Well, bring on the pandemic, and 70% of Wisconsin voted absentee. None of us wanted to go out, and many of us didn't. But it's caused all of the conversation that we're having now about the integrity of absentee ballots, the integrity of the results of those elections. It's all because stuff changed quickly and changed into a response to the pandemic, which, by the way, when you read so much of this stuff, these reviews that are going on, I never hear the word pandemic. It's like this stuff just happened because people thought to themselves, oh, I think I want to vote absentee. It's like, no, we were in a pandemic. We still are in a pandemic. So it's kind of nonsense. But
other questions before we wind up? Let me see. I see something in the chat. I will certainly send everyone the link to the recorded courts webinar that Debra participated on as a panel. I think this is also an opportunity for you, Debra, you mentioned that the national is now about lifting from the bottom up. And I know that the state of Wisconsin has said a number of things through some of the subcommittees up to the national. Can you want to brag a little bit about some of the things that we've done there?
I'll go back, because of folks like Debbie Patel and the other plaintiffs in our Whitford case, we already had information going out to Wisconsinites about, the negative impact of partisan gerrymandering. So even as the National League was standing up people-powered fair maps, they were using our stuff. So Wisconsin was a leader in that space because we had to be because of Whitford v. Gill. Right now, with the in word and practice implementation of what are the new DEI policy, here too, Wisconsin has been leading. We didn't always call it DEI, but we have been in this space of trying to ensure that we have impact. And some of that is because, frankly, I'll brag up me, I guess. I was invited to some of the first steering table meetings for what has ultimately become the transformation journey. We had a meeting of leaders out in New York. I was at that meeting. There was a convening of folks in Washington, D.C., 2 different years in a row back in 16 and 17. I was at those tables. But as I was participating and learning and seeing what was happening, for those of you who've come to annual meeting all those years, I was telling all of you about it. And we were getting ourselves jazzed up about being more inclusive and making more impact and being able to celebrate our power. And, words that were off-putting to some at that time, I think we've all become comfortable with the fact that we have power. I hope we do anyway. And so that has been, kind of our Wisconsin journey. And as part of that journey in the last number of years, we were one of the first in the nation to develop a DEI survey. We were one of the first in the nation to develop a demographic survey so we could actually know who we are and work to be more inclusive. But we had to have the baseline. Who are we today I can't measure change if I don't know what my starting point is. So we built these tools, we're sharing them up and they're sharing them out. And it's great. It's great for us. It's great for the organization. So. Oh, Christy, you're on mute.
I definitely want to say this. Your leadership is just incredible. And I think we're fortunate to be part